Have you ever read a self-help book, but after you finished it, you realized you never actually took action on any of it? Well, it's not your fault. Instead, it's due to 4 hidden paradoxes among self-help books that actually makes the advice they offer impossible to implement. And in this video, I'm going to reveal these paradoxes and then teach you a reading method that will help you overcome them, actually distill actionable advice from what you read, and take decisive action like most people can't. Starting with the first paradox that makes self-help advice impossible to follow: positivity versus realism. Have you ever read an adage, something along the lines of always think positive or always focus on the positive? Well, this message pervades pretty much every self-help book out there, most notably in such classics as The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale and Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And staying positive sounds like good advice, right? But then you read other books such as Failing Forward by John Maxwell or Principles by Ray Dalio, and they seem to tell you the exact opposite. Instead of simply staying positive, you should train yourself to focus on your failures and weaknesses so you can improve, and also focus on creating realistic instead of idealistic goals. Back when I was running my first business that had a heavy sales focus, I read a ton of these sorts of books, and I struggled to understand how to reconcile these 2 points of view. On the one hand, I was strongly encouraged by everyone around me to visualize myself as already successful and tell myself, cancel, when negative thoughts entered my head. Yet, on the other hand, I was simultaneously told to look inward and face my flaws so I could achieve a breakthrough. Like, what the hell? How was I supposed to square these both away? Well, after having run a total of 3 businesses now over the past 12 years, I've learned a much better way of reading any type of advice or self-help book, such that 1, it's actually logically consistent and therefore clear, and 2, it actually motivates me to take action immediately. And this reading method is what I call character-based reading. Think for a moment about the real problem with this paradox of positivity versus realism that I experienced, and that you probably experienced too. You see, the problem isn't that these 2 ideas are absolutely contradictory in every situation. Instead, the issue is simply that they often can coexist, but that sometimes they simply can't coexist. That is, in some situations, you actually need to be negative, and in other situations, you actually shouldn't be focusing on your flaws or weaknesses, and you should be a little idealistic. Character-based reading, then, is an idea I derived from my formal academic study of what is called virtue theory. This theory states that rules and principles for action are inadequate because they simply will not apply to every single situation in your life. Instead, the validity of any rule depends on the context. And virtue theory, and by extension character-based reading, is extremely helpful here. When you read, instead of asking yourself, how should I apply this rule? Ask yourself instead, what kind of person should I be? And how and in what kinds of situations would they or would they not apply this rule? If you're not clear on how to answer this question, because let's face it, it takes some time to figure it out, a good place to start is by asking yourself, whom in my life do I greatly respect, and how would they behave in a given situation? And just so you can start implementing this type of reading right away, let's create what's called an archetype, or an idealized type of person that you can imagine the next time you read some advice that promotes either realism or positivity. And let's call that archetype the resilient person. When you read this type of advice, ask yourself, how would the resilient person implement this rule? In what situations would the resilient person not implement this rule? When I first started asking these types of questions while reading self-help books, this started to measurably help me make better decisions that ultimately led to more income. So start trying it out for yourself. But that's not the end of the paradoxes we see among self-help books. And if you don't notice these additional 3, you'll still just stay stuck where you are. So then let's take a look at the next self-help paradox: giving up versus quitting strategically. If you've ever been in the self-help aisle of a bookstore for even 10 minutes, you've probably come across a phrase such as never give up. This is the central theme in books such as Grit by Angela Duckworth or David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me. They celebrate persistence, and they frame success as just a matter of refusing to quit no matter what. But then other books tell you the exact opposite. Seth Godin's The Dip or Greg McKeown's Essentialism both argue that knowing when to quit is actually a superpower. Instead of doubling down, they encourage you to cut your losses and redirect your time and energy into something more meaningful. Back when I was building my second business, I had two little conflicting voices in my head. On the one hand, I was hustling every minute of the day and actually making pretty good money. This is what perseverance looks like. This is what separates winners from losers, I told myself. But at the same time, I hated what I was doing. Even though I loved teaching, I didn't love running an actual test prep agency and the lack of time freedom I had. To me, it didn't really feel like success. And I remember reading The Dip and thinking, wait, so am I just supposed to quit now? I mean, isn't that betraying everything I've been telling myself about grit and persistence? Well, this is yet again where character-based reading changes everything. Because instead of treating these rules as absolute, you shift to asking, what kind of person do I want to be? And how would they act in this situation? And here's the archetype I then started visualizing as I read: the wise strategist. Think about it. The wise strategist doesn't blindly push forward at all costs, but they don't also just give up after 4 or 5 tries either. Instead, they know how to discern between a temporary setback and a true dead end. So the next time you read something like never give up or cut your losses and quit, ask yourself, how would the wise strategist apply this? When would they persist? And when would they walk away? If you start reading self-help through this lens, you gain clarity instead of confusion, because you're not asking whether perseverance or quitting is the rule. You're asking how a strategist would use both tools depending on the situation. And because of that, the paradox evaporates. But again, those aren't the only paradoxes secretly holding you back. Let's take a look at the third major self-help paradox: relationships versus goals. One of the most popular self-help books of all time, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, insists that the key to success is putting other people first, focusing on building relationships, showing genuine interest in others, and serving their needs. More recently, Adam Grant's Give and Take doubles down on that same idea, arguing that givers, people who help others without expecting immediate return, end up more successful in the long run. But then pick up a different book, say Grant Cardone's The 10X Rule or Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within, and the message is almost the opposite. Instead of focusing primarily on relationships, these books tell you to set massive goals and pursue them relentlessly. And the implication here, although it goes unstated, is striking. Namely that relationships are simply the means to your goals. When I first got into entrepreneurship, I eventually started to experience this paradox as a sort of tension embedded within all of my interactions. I had just read Dale Carnegie and I was determined to put relationships before everything else. I went to every networking event, really tried my best to get business out of my mind when I spoke to them and truly got to know and appreciate them as people. But here's the thing, I wasn't closing deals. I wasn't building traction. I was just making a lot of friends. Yeah, friends in quotation marks. But then I swung the other way and embraced the goal-obsessed approach. I focused only on hitting sales numbers and pushing for outcomes. Sure, I got more immediate results, but I also noticed people pulled away from me. People could sense when I was being transactional, and it killed people's trust in me. The philosopher Jürgen Habermas emphasizes just this kind of tension in his discussions of what he calls communicative action, which is communication for the purpose of understanding, versus strategic action, which is communication for the purpose of goal-driven persuasion. Back when I was brainwashing myself to be a super salesperson, I rejected Habermas's distinction. I truly believed that if I trained my mind hard enough, I could go into an interaction with someone with no agenda. If I did interact that way with enough people on a massive enough scale, it would naturally result in sales without my actually intending that to happen. And a lot of salespeople actually believe this because it's a very common sort of training even top salespeople such as Alex Hormozy promote. But it's just not true. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you know your true reason for even having a conversation with this person is because they're a potential prospect, not just because you want to be friends or want to help them selflessly. But this is exactly the kind of problem that character-based reading helps you solve. As you read, instead of asking, should I put relationships first or goals first, you ask, what kind of person do I want to be? And how would they balance these in practice? And here's the archetype I started using for this: the trusted leader. A trusted leader doesn't choose between relationships and goals. Instead, they act authentically toward both. They know they should be honest with themselves about their motivations and when it's appropriate to have what kind of motivation. Because let's face it, communicative action or strategic action aren't inherently bad or good. They each have their role and context. When you're trying to sell or pitch, be honest with yourself about it and clear about it with the person you're communicating with. Don't do some sort of mental gymnastics to avoid being direct about it. When your intention is purely for understanding and mutual growth, be clear and direct about that too. Who's someone in your life you know who is really great at balancing these two types of motivation? Try to emulate that. Which of these 4 self-help paradoxes have you experienced the most struggles with? What book or books are you reading right now? And how can you start applying character-based reading in your own life? I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact, not only on your own life, but also on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.